This is the lecture on production. And in this lesson, we're going to be talking about the story of scarcity, what is used in production, decisions in production, and what it means to have efficient production. So here's the story. Suppose that you need to create breakfast for your family, and you only have enough ingredients to make either pancakes or an omelet, let's say. So what do? And this is the story of scarcity, which means that there are limited resources but unlimited wants. So don't think of scarcity in terms of there's only a small amount of this good. There could be an abundance of goods like eggs, but we're faced with sometimes daily decisions on what to do with our limited resources. And it's often easy to think about this decision, these dilemmas in terms of opportunity cost. And what this means is you're comparing two different goods and you want to look at what you have to give up in terms of the other good to do this good. So that's probably not a good example, but a better example would be study time versus socializing, or study time versus working time. So what you have to give up in terms of studying is an extra hour at work. So this is the story. This is the really kind of the basic story of economics is how do we decide what to produce and how much to produce? So I wrote down a couple of other examples here. We're talking about what you want to eat for dinner. You can either have one cheeseburger or two slices of pizza, or the example I gave earlier, 1 hour of studying versus 1 hour of working. And we can graph our dilemma, and we're going to be using a lot of graphs in this course. And here I looked at two kind of crafts, sculptures and paintings. And I think most of you, even if you're not art majors, can kind of appreciate that it might take a lot longer to make a sculpture than a painting. At least I'm assuming that. I could be completely wrong. But here, what this graph is saying is that in the same amount of time it takes to create two sculptures, you could create 4 paintings. So you have to give up 2 paintings for every 1 sculpture that you're doing. And here we can actually calculate this, and this is the opportunity cost of producing sculptures in terms of paintings. So get familiar with that terminology. We can either produce 2 sculptures or 4 paintings. So the cost of sculptures in terms of paintings is 4 divided by 2, or 2 paintings. Okay. Also notice that this graph right here, it has a funny shape to it. It looks a little concave right here, and that's on purpose. And what that means is that to go from one good to the other, you have to give up more of the other. So let's look at another example. In this example, we have either 4 wine or 20 olives. So how many olives does 1 wine cost? We're looking at the cost of wine in terms of olives. So here we have 4 wine equals 20 olives, and just write this all out so you could better do the math. 4 wine equals 20 olives. Divide both sides by 4, and you get the price of olives for 1 wine. So 1 wine costs 5 olives. So the cost of wine in terms of olives is 1 wine equals 5 olives. You could also do the opposite. You could look at what's the cost of 1 olive in terms of wine. How much wine does 1 olive cost? So take a minute and do this as a practice exercise. All right, and you should get 1 olive equals 1/5 of a wine. It's funny to think about it that way, but what it's showing is that olives are a lot cheaper than wine. Another way to interpret this is the opportunity cost for 1 wine is 5 olives. So here we have our graph, and you could see we could either make 4 wines or 20 olives. So the slope of this graph is 1 over 5. And you can interpret the slope is the opportunity cost of olives of wine in terms of olives. Next, let's talk about efficient versus inefficient decisions when looking at production in the economy, or even in your everyday life. It's good to talk about, if you can produce two things and you can't produce both, but a combination of both. What does it mean to be efficient? What's a good decision? So obviously, the two red stars, one is 4 wine and 0 olives, and another is 20 olives and 0 wine. Both are efficient decisions. Both are good decisions because you're maximizing the amount of wine or olives that you could produce given your finite resources. To use the example from earlier, if you're talking about paintings or sculptures, if you make either 2 sculptures and 0 paintings, or 4 paintings and 0 sculptures, both of those are efficient decisions. But what about a combination of the two? The combination would be, for example, 2 wine and 10 olives. That is also an efficient decision because efficient decisions are all the points that are actually on the graph. So 2 wine and 10 olives is a perfectly reasonable, perfectly efficient decision. And in the previous example, when talking about paintings and sculptures, if you made 1 sculpture and 2 paintings, that would also be efficient because that example would be on the graph. But what about an inefficient decision? The inefficient decision is below the graph, as you can see in this gray star. This example will be, for example, 1 wine and 3 olives will be inefficient because given the time and the resources that you have, you could produce more of either one or both goods. So think about efficient decisions as that which is on the graph, any combination on the curve, that maximizes your production based on the resources that you have. So let's look at what we mean by the means of production, or the things the resources that we use to produce goods. And traditionally, we talk about 4: lands, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And the 2 big ones that we talk about are labor and capital. And capital is, in finance, you usually think of that in terms of money, but here in economics, the money itself doesn't matter. Capital are the tools, the machines, the factories that money buys to produce goods. So I usually like to think of capital as the big factory that's producing bricks, for example, or if you're looking at a pizzeria, it's the oven that's used to make the pizza. So to wrap up, there's a lot of information, a little amount of time. But just to wrap up, we have limited resources and unlimited wants. This is the principle of scarcity. Based on this principle of scarcity, we can use the production possibilities frontier to help make decisions. Any point on the curve is called efficient. Any combination of those goods is called efficient. Any point below the curve is called inefficient. And we also use the opportunity cost of producing one good in terms of another good to help us make decisions, to help us make better decisions about production when we have a finite amount of resources. And the opportunity cost is defined as the value of the other good that we need to give up.